What do you say we take a look into two films this time around? More specifically, I mean the fact that I've just been shown two documentary films fairly recently, and they're both very interesting in their own right, but they're both very, very different. And I realize that a recurring trend with my film studies course is that there's about two films within a similar caliber, so I figured it'd be an interesting idea to give it a try just in case. But here we go, a documentary double feature. One is called Touching the Void, and the other is called Grizzly Man. And both of them are not exactly what I think can be conceivably called traditional documentary films. First, Touching the Void. What does that film concern? Well, it concerns two climbers attempting to climb the Sula Grande, apparently the most dangerous mountain in the Andean mountain range of South America. The film documents their attempt at climbing the mountain and how they in fact successfully reach the summit, but the very disastrous and near-fatal attempt on both their behalves to try and climb back down. And I won't reveal any details beyond that, but let's just say that it's quite a thrilling experience, that film. If anything, it's barely a documentary. If anything, it's more like it's trying to be a film adaptation of the events that are being told by the two climbers as they look back into their traumatic memories. The narration alone is enough to get a lot across, but the way that the events have been recreated in film form to drive things forward and create more visceral impact does cause a lot more of a visceral impact in this film. And as things progress, it's hard not to wonder how on earth either of them made it out of there alive, because the situations they get in are beyond dire. In fact, I'll admit, by the time it was done, I couldn't speak, because it was just so effective in what it did. The atmosphere it brought to life in there was terrific. It was very, very thrilling. The actors they got to play the fictionalized representatives of the two climbers were very compelling in their performances, and it's just one of the most bone-chilling things I have ever seen in my life, and I've seen quite a lot of that, as you're probably well aware. So I think it's pretty safe to say that if you have not come across this documentary film, and I'd imagine a lot of you have not, go ahead and try it, but it's not for the squeamish. It's not gory or anything, but it's very mentally unsettling, and it's no surprise that the two of them are very reluctant to climb anything that dangerous ever again. So, but still, I would insist, give it a try. On the worth meter, it definitely deserves at least a worth renting. And I'd say it's a 4.5 out of 5 film in terms of documenting something. It barely misses the top spot once or twice because every now and then the fictionalization doesn't entirely serve what goes on, but that's really a minor nitpick in many senses, and really any problems I have with the decisions made by the people, well, they're humane decisions because they were real things that happened, so it's kind of difficult to judge that in comparison to a fictionalized story. So I can definitely give this film a pass, at the very least. In fact, scratch that. It's a very, very well done documentary film, if it is rather unconventional in that sense, and quite a work of art in its kind. Now on to the second film, Grizzly Man. This film is the work of Werner Herzog, who is actually quite a remarkable filmmaker and certainly a very strange one. He specializes in art house cinema, but also very strangely personal documentary films. And Grizzly Man is the document about a man who spent the majority of his adult life camping in the wilds of Alaska in places densely populated with grizzly bears, animals that are not exactly the kinds of creatures that humans can get along with, or animals that get along well with people. Indeed, there's a terrible track record between the two, yet he surprisingly did a very good job, according to the documentary, trying to get used to them and have the bears get used to him and form a very strange bond to them. It's very charmingly childlike almost how innocent and excited he seems half the time. Yet, also, he does seem quite aware of the danger he puts himself in, and this doesn't necessarily count as spoilers because it's actually revealed very early on in the film he eventually is killed by one of the bears during one expedition. However, the film does go on to show everything that he did, or more or less everything that he achieved during those years living in the wilderness, trying to learn how to communicate with the animals, and how, for the most part, it paid off very well. It's another very fascinating work. And again, it's not that conventional a documentary. If anything, there hardly seems to be a sense of direction to it. It's more like Werner Herzog compiled a bunch of footage of the person who's the subject of the documentary and compiled it together and maybe once or twice added footage of him personally interviewing people connected. So, in that sense, Herzog's credit as director is fairly loose, and yet he does a good job putting the footage together. If anything, I find it very interesting how he actually keeps the points in the footage where Timothy stops his announcements and just pauses for a moment before moving back to the camera to turn it off, and even showing the different takes that he did. If anything, it shows an interesting introspect into his mind. Really, the only downside that I can glean from this film is that sometimes Timothy's rather childlike personality almost does seem to make for a couple unintentionally funny moments when it comes to his reactions to certain things, but there's still a charm to them nonetheless, and there's certainly a good amount of heart that certainly is rather hard to effectively pull off, and indeed, it's so easy to fabricate, but it does feel very genuine, even if it seems like the kind of personality that'd be very rare to come across in any other human being. And for that, I'd say it's quite an interesting watch. I wouldn't recommend it quite as much as Touching the Void, but I will say it's a very fascinating look into the mind of a rather unusual type of eccentric. Yes, imagine that, someone unusual among the eccentrics. And certainly a nice way to get introduced to Werner Herzog's rather unusual style of bringing things together in just the documentary film realm alone. So, it's another worth renting level on the worth meter ranking for me, though I wouldn't really put it that much far past worth renting. I wouldn't quite call it a worth owning documentary film, but it's definitely worth checking out several times. And out of 5 stars, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. Hope you like this idea of doing 2 in one go, but if not, be sure to let me know if there's more work that needs to be done more quickly, but just thought I'd do a little bit of an experiment, and hope this gives you a good idea for those of you who have not heard of these films, and thank you for your time.